Welcome to the welcome to the Untitled Podcast. You know what the name is. We don't, but we're getting hopefully maybe really we spent like 5 minutes talking about the name of the podcast just before we got started. So trust us, we are making progress. This is the third show. Maybe by the fourth one, we'll know what we're called. I'm Ken Newquist, 40-something geek dad, comic book fan, and outdoor enthusiast who does not get outdoors nearly enough these days. And I'm joined by my co-host,
David Moore, and I'm also a 40-something geek dad, coder, gamer, and guy who says yes to his inner voice far too often for new projects. This week, we're going to talk about some of the stuff we did this last week, and I'm realizing maybe we don't have a main topic as we go through this. We'll come up with something. There'll be a subtle cut as we talk about that, I'm sure. But both a lot and not a lot has happened with me this last week. I've been exercising a lot, more than I was last week. I found myself going on at least 3, if not 4, 20-minute walks a day, which is weird because this week is in the high 80s, and yet I still feel so much better after walking. It gives me a lot of headspace to think about stuff. I just put on some music. Occasionally a podcast, but sometimes a podcast shoves the other thoughts out of my head. You might be hearing some fireworks because it is that time of year.
We're getting really close to the 4th of July, although we haven't needed any excuses to fire off fireworks here in Pennsylvania because now they're legal.
Oh, okay. Yeah, they are.
No judgment. I'm just saying there's more fireworks going off because now people can buy them.
Yeah, they are legal in Indiana as well. Actually, I got a message from someone in our subdivision on Nextdoor. I don't know if you're familiar with that social media network. They're like, yeah, just so you know, if you have young children or pets who are afraid of fireworks, we are definitely holding our annual show on the 3rd. Okay, it's big enough that you have to warn us.
Well, it's nice that they're warning you.
Yeah. I moved from Illinois 2 years ago, and they had a lot of fireworks in our town, even though they were illegal. Here, people take it to 11. They're not shooting it past 11. They realize people need to sleep, but there's a lot. Very pretty. Just so you know, this podcast is probably going to be later than hopefully future podcasts will be. Not that you care, because none of this has come out yet, and you don't even know that this podcast exists yet when we're recording it, at least. But I'm really behind on editing. Hopefully we have better audio.
The podcast will be perfect by the time it's finally released.
Right. And then you get to listen through all the crappy stuff. And then you'll get to the really good stuff. Maybe we'll do them out of order, and then it'll be really good, and then it will become crappy.
That's great, because people are so used to the opposite, right?
Right, yeah.
Why improve over time when you could be crappy, then good, then crappy, then good?
Yeah. I started reading The Color of Magic by Terry Pratchett, the first book in the Discworld series. Tor Books, one of the people there, it's a virtual book club, and so they said, I'm going to read Color of Magic, and we're just going to start reading the Discworld series. I've read other books from the Discworld series. Terry Pratchett himself has said, if you are starting with the Discworld series, don't start with The Color of Magic, because it was his very first book on it. My friend John, he introduced me to a good reading order for Discworld. And it's out there on the internet. And I started, I think, with some Guards, I think was my first book. I started that, and I've also realized after years of reading about your summer reading list that I should probably start my own reading list, because I can't just go and browse a bookstore shelf and just grab something when I want to read. So often I would go very long spans without reading things. So I've kind of got a few books right now, and I'm going to be adding to it as a reading list. Color Magic is right now. I picked up The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal. And then there's another one called Gideon the Ninth. And I thought it's by Tamsin Muir. And I thought it sounded really cool, but I can't remember where I first heard about it. I think it might have been on Twitter. And I guess I'll talk about it more when I actually read into it, because I can't remember a ton about it other than Gideon either in service to or is a necromancer. That's really generic. So I'll have it. It was pretty cool when I read about it enough that I immediately bought it on Kindle. So I'm gonna partly steal probably one of your segments, which is the fact that we finished our last segment of Tales from the Loop. As we mentioned last time, Ken and I were playing in a game of Tales from the Loop with some friends, and we finished our last session this last Friday. I had a lot of fun with it. It's a fun game, and I realize I'm way out of practice with narrative style games, which is what that game tends to lean toward. Our group really started to kind of come out of its shell or get more enthused, at least it seemed to me, when we focused more on the kids and their background and their interactions rather than the adventure itself. And so since I was running a module, which is what I don't normally do ever, all the way back to when I first started gaming, I will take modules, I will steal from modules, but then I will run my own game. And this time I ran the module, and it felt like sometimes like you as a player, not you personally, but like the group, I should say, was like waiting for the next shoe to drop, or the next, like, here's your next hook that you must follow, is the way that it kind of felt. And I want to play more, either play or run, because Tales from the Loop seems like one of the things that, like, if like you or anybody else in the group wanted to run, I could make a kid, and then their kid could just be off at grandma's house for the weekend, and just do that.
Yeah, I think that would be really easy. I think, as the book also talks about, like I think it's like a campaign landscape, or the story landscape, where, like, it's almost like it's sandboxy, right? I don't want to call it a hex crawl, but like there are encounters in the land, and then you're on your bike and running around the land, and I guess if you're on your bike, you're cycling around the land, but you're going from place to place and you're encountering things, and then stuff just kind of happens, right? So there could be the broken down robot in the woods, and you guys let's go play in the woods, right? Like I think it was fun. I mean, I certainly enjoyed it. I think it's always challenging to learn a new game. I think that the challenge for us as kids was figuring out how to build up those social interactions between the kids. I think the game kind of expects that you're going to have these cutscenes where you're and now it's Saturday morning. What cartoon are you watching? And wait, your parents are fighting in the background. What do you do? Right. And I think the challenge is, like, the thing I was thinking about, there's nothing, I don't know if that kind of narrative responsibility should be falling on the game master, or like the characters, the player should be taking more ownership. It doesn't have a mechanic like Fate does, like when we would play Spirit of the Century, where I can compel this aspect of your character. Right. Like, you may not want to actually engage in this thing, and if you don't want to, that's totally cool. But hey, here's this cool little, Fate chip. If you want to, buy what I'm selling, we can have some fun with this, right? Yep. And so I don't know that Tales from the Loop necessarily has that particular mechanic to encourage those kinds of things.
Yeah, there's not an economy in that sense. It's much more of a, you kind of offer, but the other person can always refuse, or like a player can call for a scene, of like, hey, I want to do this, but there isn't like there isn't a point or fate point or anything like that sort of economy to facilitate that. It's just whenever someone wants to do that, they kind of offer it up, and fitting those in naturally feels like that's hard for me, at least with this group currently, because none of us have played together before. Like you and I have played in a game before. I've played with Natalie before, separately, years ago, and then Taylor. Yeah, I thought it was Taylor. Obviously, I have not played with him before because we just met. So, yeah, overall, I think our group was also kind of still gelling together and understanding each other when the game ended. So, I'm hoping we continue. The call is out there for the group to say, hey, let's keep going, and we'll let you know if that actually happens. But Tales from the Loop itself, especially if you like a narrative game, where you have some ad-libbing, and you have like proactive players who say, hey, I want to go do this. This is a good game for you.
I agree, and I think it's also a fairly forgiving game. I mean, it is meant to be, you're playing kids, so the kids are never going to get hurt. We talked about that before. But even within the game, there's a lot of different ways to pull in, like to help each other, and to pull in extra dice and build up that dice pool. Now, if I built up the dice pool, I'm not going to roll any sixes, which are what are successes, because that's the way I was rolling in this game. Those dice will be purged and replaced with new dice if and when we get to
it. It was kind of weird. It was kind of weird watching all those dice rolls. The bigger the pool, it seemed the less likely people were to succeed, even though you only need one success on all those dice to get a basic success. But I remember Taylor was rolling like 8 dice. It's like, this is my character's signature skill: 8 dice, 0 successes.
And so it does give you these opportunities. Like, there are ways to re-roll because you have luck points, and so it does. It like, that's why I say it's very forgiving in so much as I played other games where it's like, well, you lost, so now you lose a limb. It's not that kind of a game.
Yeah, it's much more of like Spirit of the Century, Dresden Files, Fate in general, or some other games that are similar to that, where Blades in the Dark is also similar to that, where failure makes the story more interesting, not as a roadblock to stop things until you figure out a way around it. So like, you can still succeed in the action, but there's a consequence for that action. Like at one point you guys were trying to move a big pole, big heavy pole, and if you had failed, you would have been fatigued. So you still would have moved the pole, but it would have taken something out of you. And so now you have some penalties for the fact that you're fatigued, on your dice pools. And then it's super easy to call for a scene of like, hey, I want us all to go back to our hideout and talk about some stuff. And then all of those temporary conditions just go away because you take some time and, you work through being scared, or you rest a little and your fatigue is gone, or you put a Band-Aid on the cut, that sort of thing.
Right.
And it's only when you've taken multiples of those conditions and don't have a chance, or you've pushed yourselves to keep going when maybe you guys shouldn't have as a kid, where you can get like, you fell off your bike and broke your leg. Okay, well now that's a more long-term thing, and now you have a cast for the rest of the summer. Yeah, I like it. It's a neat system. I'd like to play more of it. And if we don't play more of that, more of a different game would also be pretty cool.
And as we discussed before, we've got plenty that we want to play. So there's certainly fodder for future games.
Yeah, I don't remember if I talked about Ex Novo last time we spoke, but
I don't believe we did.
It was a game that I picked up in itch.io's bundle for Racial Justice, and there's like 1,700 different items in there. And I picked that up, and I found Ex Novo in among those nearly 2,000 different things. But it's neat. So Ex Novo is the idea is you are the conceit is you're a guardian spirit of this newly founding settlement, and it's meant to be played with one or more. They say 4, but reading through it, you could have more than 4, especially if you're building a big settlement or an old settlement. And basically, it's just a framework for you to kind of build an area, a city or something like that. And it's very similar in concept to the Dresden Files role-playing game, where after you're done making all of your characters, all of you as players sit down and go through the very similar character creation process, but you create the city that all of your characters will be adventuring in. That's where you all live. That's where all the adventures will take place. And so the city itself becomes another character in the game. which is a really, really cool concept and makes for some pretty, if you have the time, the time to do your session zeros, it might be multiple session zeros for your character creation, your city creation. I could see a very long lasting Dresden Files campaign happening because everyone has kind of a way to touch base with the city, and they have a very personal connection to it, both as the character, but as a person who said, yeah, I made this shop we're going to go to, so they have a very kind of visceral connection to it. And Novo is kind of the same thing, but more generic for any setting. For the Gamma World Hex Crawl, not everybody could show up this last weekend. And so I'm like, okay, well, we only have myself and 2 of the players. Let's try this thing. Let's crack out Ex Novo. Well, we decided on a settlement size. We said it's going to be, kind of a smaller settlement with maybe a generation or so having lived there. And it started out, I was worried starting out. It was like, oh, great. Okay. So we have this map and we drew some lines on it for different areas. And then it's like, okay, well, now roll for the major geographic features. Like, oh, great. There's a river through it. But then we started actually getting into some of the other pieces of it. It actually takes you through a couple of steps of that settlement growing. Shortly after that river was there, another feature was, someone created a feature of, there was a cave system, but we described the cave system, the person who rolled for that, basically you take turns as you go and you roll on these different charts. And so that person went, okay, well, the cave system, since this is Gamma World, the cave system, there's a bunch of small caves that are lined with metal. And out of one of the caves has robots that occasionally go in and out of it, but no one has been able to find any doors or any openings that when the robots go in, we don't know where they go because the cave just sort of ends. And so that's like off to the side of the settlement. It's like, so this is a potential adventure just waiting to happen, and then we found out, oh, the major food supply was some edible animals. And so we came up with the idea that there are crickets about the length of your hand are, basically these giant grasshoppers, not crickets, grasshoppers. And so we named them hoppers. That's what this settlement's primary meat source is. And then from there, we were supposed to make a new faction, and we're like, oh, we have the brewers faction, who after the meat's been harvested, they take the carcasses and any of the bits and bobs that are remaining and throw them into a vat and let that ferment. And then they boil things up and they make beer and spirits out of it. Literal bug juice.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And so, and then it was like, okay, this is pretty cool. We got some ideas. Several of us were like, yeah, I wonder how the brewers are going to develop. And then we had another group called the Diggers, which wanted to do some engineering things, build up more architecture and like some aqueduct type things to bring water to the fields that the hoppers lived in. And then the next phase, there was a disaster. The brewers district caught on fire after a massive explosion, and one of the elders of the town died. Some of this was rolling of like, hey, something happens, one of the factions loses power, but we got to decide why. And that was, so it's not all, it definitely not pre-scripted. And so we went with this, one of the elders died. Now spirits aren't allowed to be brewed anymore because it's thought that one of the distilleries exploded and that was the cause of the fire. And it just went on from there. There's now another faction called the Herders, because in one of our steps, all the grasslands that these hoppers lived in died out because of one reason or another. And now those hoppers aren't as concentrated. They weren't in pens like chickens or anything like that. So they're free roaming. And so now we have the Herders that actually go around, hop boys and hop pokes to go around and herd these giant grasshoppers to keep the food supply going. And then when we ended with it, it's like everybody is like, yeah, I want to play again. I want to go back to town now, because everybody has, the town has a history, and it's everybody who is there has their finger on a portion of it. and I think it'll be a pretty cool RP tool in this hex crawl. I'm looking forward to this next Sunday, although probably won't happen since that'll be like the day after 4th of July, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that kind of collaborative world building is always really cool. I think my group many years ago, I ran a campaign called Dark City, which was set in our homegrown city of Obsidian Bay and set in like the world of Greyhawk on the frontier. And so we played in it for years. And so we started off as first level characters living in the city. And so it was primarily an urban campaign. And so the cool thing is, it's like, you know, you're just constantly like, everybody would have a scene. I would do round robin around the table, tell me like where you are, what is it you're going to do? And so people would, you know, oh, well, there's this dress shop or like that potion shop, or I need to want to buy this thing. And like, that's the kind of thing that always happens kind of, or I like it when it happens organically. I shouldn't say it always happens, right? Because sometimes it's like pulling teeth to get players to want to do that sort of thing. Like, oh, no, that's your job as the GM, right? Especially if they're not really that comfortable with that sort of thing.
Right.
But in that game, it was great because we were just kind of, it really fleshed out the city because we've been playing in this city for like, my campaign is very long running. So we've been playing in this city for like 10 years. We were playing high level adventurers who were going off and occasionally accidentally blowing up portions of town and getting kicked out of Greyhawk or what have you. Oops. So to come back and be like the red shirts who are like living on the streets or, you know, at that level, like street level adventuring was kind of cool, right? Like, oh, there are giant rats coming out of the sewers. Who knew? That seems bad.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of the reasons I like things like Fate and such, is that sort of situation happens in D&D games where groups are like, oh yeah, let me make up this NPC, or let me make up this corner shop, or, you know, an alchemist or whatever. But there's nothing in the rules that says that it's allowed. And a lot of times if it's not in the rules, especially, it's weird, especially long-time gamers, if it's not in the rules, they don't think they can do it. It just doesn't occur to people that they can do it. Like even me, you know, it happens to me too.
It's hard to break habits.
It is.
I mean, we found that in other games. Oh,
here's
played,
here's my codified rule set. I will live within that rule set. Whereas with Fate, you know, one of the things it says at the very beginning of Fate is your character is proactive. That things don't happen to your character, you happen to the world. It gives you mechanics to do that as well. You know, it's like, I want this to happen. Or, you know, I know a guy, you know, down at the docks, and then you know, spending that fate point, you can then describe who that guy is and some of their past background and past, and add to the world. It's a different mindset. I love when it happens in D&D, but it doesn't happen nearly as often because it's not something that
it's not really the structure of the game.
It's not part of the structure of the game. Right. Rules sometimes really matter in that sense.
Right. Yeah, I think sometimes they need that incentive. I've played games, like I played the Battlestar Galactica game. We did a play test of that many years ago, and it's using the Cortex system, and it has you know, it has kind of like a reward system where there's bonus points that you can use to spend to increase your dice pool and what have you. And so when I had play tested it at Gen Con, you know, the GM had said, like, you know, basically the rewards should flow like rain. Yes. And it created this really cool dynamic that pulled people out of their shells. And like, you know, so like it was setting up this reward system that really just like people who were playing this game, and like, they just like, I just don't know how they're describing it. They came out of their shells and they were just really into it because the game was really rewarding them. And you don't always need that, but it's cool when it can be a nice little carrot.
Yeah, I think the Firefly role-playing game was like pre-Cortex, but they took a lot of the ideas from that and made Cortex. And that was one of the things when I was running Firefly games at Gen Con. That's the way that I would do that economy. You know, it's like if someone said something funny at the table, I'd give them a reward. You know, and so that would encourage people to do more funny things. If someone did something amazing, you know, and described a fight scene amazingly, I would give them a reward. And then they would be able to then spend that. And so, like, almost all the time, players were like on the edge of being broke with this economy, but they were getting a constant influx of the new stuff, so they didn't feel like they needed to hoard it. And that's the way to make those economies really work, is to constantly have that turnover, coolness coming in and going.
Yeah, exactly. So So in my past week, I also was keeping up my exercise. So I started week 4 of my 10K training routine. And now it's getting hard, folks.
Uh-oh.
Actually, today was interval day, so that it's I mentioned this previously. Like, I've been running distances of like 3 to 4 miles, and my goal with the 10K is to get to that distance, right? And so part of this is intervals training because it builds up strength for those longer runs. And today it rained. Like, I went out on my run, I was halfway through the workout, and it just started to pour.
Oh,
So
no.
I'm proud of myself for just keeping on. Like, you know what? All right, so you're wet. You're just going to get more wet. There wasn't any thunder, right? Like, there was no real good reason to stop. And it wasn't such a torrential downpour that it was dangerous. It was just like, okay, well, now I'm just running in the rain. And so part of this, I think I've been doing some reading on it. Like, I'm 48 years old. So, some of the parts are not working quite as well as they used to. And so the challenge as you start getting to longer distances is making sure you don't hurt yourself. And so I've been doing a strength training routine to build up strength, like in your core muscles. Like, everybody, like my sister is really big into CrossFit. It's awesome for her. It's not really my thing, but they talk about your core.
Right.
And, the thing is, though, it actually does help. Like, like you and I spend a lot of time sitting, if you're a programmer, developer, writer, what have you, like, if you spend so much time sitting, your posture just goes to crap.
Yeah.
And it helps with things like repetitive stress injuries and lots of other things. So I hate doing this. I hate this kind of exercise, but I'm doing it.
Yeah. I mean, more than a few now, 3 or 4 years ago, I was getting pretty bad back pain. 4 years ago is about when it stopped, and I'll tell you why. I would start to get up out of a chair, and my back would just spasm so hard that I'd have to literally just fall back into the chair because it was so painful. And I got shots, I got x-rays. They had started talking about surgery stuff. I was doing physical therapy. Physical therapy kind of helped. And I think ultimately, based on the timing, it was helping, but I wasn't noticing it really starting to affect me. But that was also the time that I started teaching Angular. And so my company sent me to Washington, D.C. to teach. And I was like, well, we're going to Washington, D.C. I'm going to be there. Why don't I just go there for the whole week, and I'll get like an Airbnb, and I'll bring the family with me. And while I'm teaching, they can go all around Washington, D.C. and see all the history and et cetera, because it's better than learning it in a classroom. Classroom's great. Seeing it in person is a whole different experience.
Most definitely.
And so that's what we did. And I stood for most of the classes because that's just the way I teach. Often when I GM physically especially at a con, I'll stand up just for that extra energy. I just get so excited I can't sit still. And then we walked all over the place around Washington, D.C. And after that week, weirdly enough, my back pain was pretty much gone. And that was purely because, I was standing. It forced my core muscles to develop better, just be better in general. And it was earlier this year that after 4 or 5 months of pretty intensive project work where I was, I have a gear fit, and it was telling me I was walking less than 2,000 steps a day. My back was starting to hurt again. And that's part of the reason why I started the whole walking every day sort of thing. Right now I'm at almost 13,000 steps. So big difference.
Yeah, big difference.
I'm not nearly as distance wise as you're doing, but it's the back problems have gone away again. It's not, I did have less, not the vertebrae, the discs. One of the discs was a little bit flattened. It wasn't herniated or anything like that when I had done all the x-ray stuff before, but it wasn't that shortening that was the problem. It was the muscles around it were just weak. It makes a huge difference.
It does. Yeah, I had the same sort of similar experience with just the back pain. I haven't, since I've been doing all of this, like when I first started running, my back would kill me. And this was like 5 or 6 years ago. And so, and part of it, I just didn't know what I was doing. You know, once I actually went and did like the Couch to 5K training program, I realized, okay, I need to build in some stretches. One does not just like decide to run out their front door and like suddenly you're a runner, right?
Right.
Well, you can be, but you're probably going to hurt yourself.
It's harder to do that when you're 40. When you're
you know what? If you're 17, you could probably totally get away with that. But at 40, you definitely can't. So yeah, I've got like planks and lunges and it's a foam roller and squats and all of this good stuff. But it's, you know, it's not my favorite thing. I don't really like strength training, but I can't argue with the results. So that's been kind of my week. And then
cool.
I've been looking at video games. So I made it to. Is either impressive or pathetically sad. I finally made it to the final temple in Legends of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It's only taken me 22 years. I mean, I started playing this on the Nintendo 64, and I am finally now in the freaking final temple on my 3DS. So
okay. So you have the easier water temple.
I did have the easier water temple. So I read up on the old water temple, and it was very hard.
Yeah, I actually still have my Nintendo 64 and Ocarina of Time, and my kids have played it. I don't know if they've actually completed the whole thing, but yeah, that's the original water temple. I hear it's better on the 3DS than it is on the Nintendo 64. I don't really remember it being super hard. That was a long time ago.
It's a multi-dimensional. I think what's challenging about it, it's multiple levels, and you have to like solve different puzzles to get the water levels to go up, and there's it's put
on boots and sink and...
it's a very tough puzzle. I got stuck on the Shadow Temple, I think it is, where you're fighting this guy who's got like two big hands that come down and do like a bongo type thing, and I just could not beat him. Like last summer I was gonna say I'm gonna beat this game, and I got to that point and I got stuck, and I didn't beat it. I kind of ran out of time, and so this past late spring into summer, I've been playing it, and I actually I beat that boss, and I have finally gotten onto the final temple. So maybe I will actually complete the game this summer.
All right. And then on to Majora's Mask.
No, my son has played it. It's fun. It's fascinating to talk about with my son about these things because he loves Zelda. He's played all the different Zelda games. And so now he's 14 now. And so he's getting to the point where he's getting nostalgic for the games when he played when he was younger. And, you know, he had gone from Ocarina of Time to Majora's Mask, and that's a trippy game. I mean, I've read about it. I certainly know what the deal is. And he's like, I didn't really understand what it was about because he was playing it when he was like 8. Right. And so, it was hard for him. And now, you know, at 14, he's like waxes nostalgic about having played this game. And now I'm actually understanding and thinking about playing it again, just to be able to experience it as a, you know, not quite a grown up, but, you know, as 14, you understand the world a little bit better than when you did when you were 8. Right.
6 years of experience.
Yeah. I think my next game, I'm either trying to talk myself into it or talk myself out of it, is DragonQuest 11, which is Echoes of an Exclusive Age, the definitive edition, which came out for Switch. And so this is a Japanese style RPG. Dragon Quest games are these huge, massive, sprawling games. I think I played the Dragon Quest 9 on the DS and then 3DS. This is one that took me 5 years to complete. I spent 200 hours playing it, and it's, you know, so it's got like kind of like the grind mechanic where, you know, I couldn't beat that boss, so I guess I have to go off and do, you know, kill slimes for a couple of hours until I level up and can go back and face it again. But it's really good. I mean, I very much enjoyed the story of Dragon Quest 9, and Dragon Quest 11 introduces this kind of like flashback segments where apparently there are dungeons, because all these, it's a RPG, right? They have to have dungeons.
Right.
Some of the dungeons are flashbacks to previous versions of Dragon Quest, like Dragon Quest 3 or 4 or whatever, and you play them in 16-bit graphic mode.
Oh my gosh. Nice.
Which I'm like, I think I have to play this.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll take me until I'm like 55 to finish it, but you know, so this is an investment.
Yep.
But and it looks great on the Switch too. So I'm torn because I know how like getting sucked into this game will do to me, but it is a cool mobile game. And the other cool thing is at the time when I first started playing Dragon Quest, I was looking for a cool RPG that you could just take with you.
Mm-hmm.
And this would be a cool RPG that I could take with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was it was my go-to game for going to conferences, or you're on a plane going to Seattle or something, or Portland, and you're on the plane for 5 hours. You can only watch so many movies. Whip out Dragon Quest, and you can play it for 2 hours. So it's not really a problem right now because we're not really going anywhere. But
yeah, my problem with games like that is is playing it outside of those free time windows. Just not like, oh yeah, I left it at this part. But
yes,
it might be
that is hard.
Yeah, it might be like a day or so before you have that span of quote unquote free time, or where you're traveling or whatever. But it's like, do I want to wait that long? Can I just not do this other thing that I'm supposed to be doing? So
exactly, which is why I say I'm either talking myself into it or talking myself out of it. I haven't quite figured out what I'm doing with it. So as you mentioned, I do have my summer reading list. It's a more manageable summer reading list. Last year I had something like 19 books on my summer reading list, and thus I didn't finish it until February of this year because I may have what's the saying? My eyes were bigger than my plate. I took on entirely too many books.
Yeah.
So I won't go overly long because I know we've been chatting for a while, but I read The Unicorn Project, which is a follow-up to The Phoenix Project, which is a novel about DevOps. So I don't know, for people in IT likely have heard of The Phoenix Project. The guys who wrote that went on to write the DevOps handbook. And whereas The Phoenix Project is really about taking kind of a traditional IT organization and applying agile and lean methodology to it. The Unicorn Project is more taking it from the perspective of you're a person who already has these techniques coming into a dysfunctional organization. These are books that can be very stressful to read if you've been in IT for a long time because
it sounds like I need to read this book right now with my current project.
Yeah, it's I would read. I mean, I recommend that the Phoenix Project is the better book, and I think it's cool because everybody has been in that IT project that we could there was just the IT project from hell that is just it seems to be going wrong in all of the ways, and especially with traditional waterfall style project management where we have this project plan, we wrote it 12 months ago. And now you're at this point where the project plan really isn't holding anymore, but people are trying to hold you to the project plan, but you've learned new things and you're just stuck in this terrible place.
Yep.
And so both of these books are about talking about different techniques for dealing with that. And so it was very invigorating for me to read these books. I very much enjoyed them, but I would start with the Phoenix Project.
Okay. My current client, it's 2 years worth of code of I've come in because they changed all of their top level management of this project because the project was moving what they thought was super fast for 2 years, but really it was get these features out the door. I don't care what the code quality is, just get the features in. And now they're running into a bunch of problems and have been for a while, which is why they've made this change in management of let's slow down now and actually make the code quality good so that we can actually put features out fast. The slow is smooth, smooth is fast sort of mentality. And I was brought in for one of the code quality things because I have a good knowledge of Angular and oh my gosh, this is literally the worst code base I have ever worked in my 20 plus years as a software developer. It's getting better. It's been getting better. And I'm very glad to see that, a majority of the team wants it to be better. That's a big, big thing. But dealing with that code is hard. So, I think the Unicorn Project and the Phoenix Project might be something that I should put on my reading list as well.
Yeah, they're reasonably fast reads. I mean, the Unicorn Project might also be a good starting point. I mean, so in the Unicorn Project they talk about 5 different ideals, and so one of them was focus, flow, and joy. And as a programmer, you shouldn't be sitting there beating your head against the wall. There should be a flow to your work that makes sense.
Yep.
That is leading to like productive releases of code, right? And you should actually enjoy it while you're doing it, right? Another thing that they talk about is like the improvement of daily work, right? So that, a lot of times you sit there and you're just like, oh man, this is terrible, but I don't have time to deal with it. Building into the organization, no, look, like if we all hate this, why don't we fix it?
Right.
Which is also the Phoenix Project gets into.
Yeah, because if you're at the point where you're hating the code that you're in, like you're not going to do as good of a job coding, but also you probably hate the code that you're in because it's not written cleanly. Another book that I love is Clean Code. And that's a book that I heartily recommend, and I still haven't finished reading it. But just we spend as coders, we spend 90% of our time or more reading code, not actually writing it. So the faster you can read it, the more time you will have to write it.
Right.
And so a lot of the code that I'm dealing with right now is, I have to put this feature in. Let me just add on to this existing component and get it done. And okay, it's done. Rather than taking a moment and going, should this be a new component? And then this other component just calls it, and then I can reuse that component somewhere else or whatever.
Right.
Because right now I'm dealing with a 5,000 line component and 3,000 lines of HTML for one component. And I'm used to large components being maybe 300 lines of code and like 50 lines of HTML. And that's large for me. This is an order of magnitude larger.
You may want to find a nice secluded room in your house to read these books, because I think as you're reading them, you're going to go, yes!
Yeah. I probably will.
This is terrible.
Yes.
Hopefully, and it gives you some, like, it's good fodder. I think my whole team's read the Phoenix Project at this point, and I think it helped us with like having some conversations about these things as we tried to be a little bit more agile in our workflows.
Yeah, it's good to have that common vocabulary to talk through, and
yes.
And say, oh yeah, it's like this whatever jargon thing, or what this, it's like this section of the book. And then like, even if you have people that disagree with that section of the book, you can have a informed conversation about it. And then what I find is as long as it's consistent in the way you handle things, that's usually a great starting point to make improvements on.
Exactly. So those are IT-oriented novels, which I never thought would actually be a thing that I would read, but I did, and I enjoyed them. Another book that I've read on my summer reading list, actually I'm reading it right now, is called Fall or Dodge in Hell by Neil Stephenson. So it's a follow-up to, I love Stephenson. Snow Crash is one of my all-time favorite books. Which is a cyberpunk novel from many years ago at this point.
Yep.
It's an indirect follow-up to Cryptonomicon, which is another one of my favorite books. And so it's also a kind of sequel of sorts to Remedy, which came out, I think, in the early, it was like 2003 or something like that.
I have not read that one yet.
And so the setup for it is it's basically taking one of the characters from Remedy and throwing him into a virtual world. So this happens very easily early on in the book, so it's not a spoiler, but the main character, Dodge, dies and has his brain scanned. And then the digital infrastructure comes about to upload his brain into the cloud, and then they start running the simulation of his brain. And so the story is the evolution of the real world as well as the evolution of the virtual world. And it's good. I mean, it's Stevenson. It's not necessarily Stevenson at his absolute best. I mean, the man in Cryptonomicon, he wrote what has probably been the single best description of someone pouring cream into coffee. Right, the way he described putting half and half into a cup of coffee and it bouncing off the bottom of the cup and coming back up again. I'm like,
and clouding over.
Yeah, it was just like the poetry, right? I could never have written it this great.
Yep.
So it's a good read. I'm enjoying that. And then I also just finished Bone Silence by Aleister Reynolds, which is it's set in a far future version of our universe, of our solar system, where we've broken down all the major planets and built space habitats out of them.
Cool.
And there have been the rise and fall of multiple civilizations. So it kind of sounds a little bit like Numenera.
Okay.
And so, but with space pirates. So you have sailing ships, which have solar sails, the sun's still there, thankfully. And so you have these sailing ships that go between the different habitats. And there's a subset of people who explore these lost worlds called baubles. And so a bauble is basically one of these worlds that has some sort of energy shield around it. When the energy shield falls, you can go in and like look for treasure, basically. And the idea is to get in, defeat the various defenses that are in place, and get out before the bauble seals up again, and you're lost in time and space for
kind of like a Brigadoon sort of concept.
Yeah,
where the town appears every couple hundred years and then disappears, and if you're still in it, when it disappears, you stay there.
Yes, exactly. And so there's 3 books in this novel. I loved the first one because it had all these baubles and like the exploration of those things, but it also had this main character named Bosa Senen, who is I think I'm pronouncing that wrong, but whatever. You guys don't know. You haven't read the book. Where she's this space pirate and is raiding the shipping lanes, and so the main characters kind of get caught in her wake, and they have to deal with her. And then the larger overarching story deals both with these baubles, but also the mystery of the rise and fall of these different civilizations. And so I really enjoy Aleister Reynolds. I think he does an excellent job of world building. The series didn't go quite where I was hoping it would go. I was hoping there would be more of these baubles because he does such an excellent job of kind of setting up that haunted house exploration. I'm hoping he'll release a collection of short stories at some point where he revisits that sort of thing. But it was a good read. It was fun. It was fast. It was perfect for summer. Cool. There's a bunch of other books on my list, which you can read over at nuketown.com. I have a tradition of reading Hellboy novels when I go camping. So that's the other thing that I'm going to be doing, is reading a bunch of Hellboy.
Did not know there was graphic novals. Okay. You said novels.
Well, there is actually a novel. My daughter picked up one of those.
Wow. Okay.
Actually, I think it's a collection of short stories. But I misspoke. I meant graphic novels. So
how many Hellboy graphic novels are there? I lost track years ago.
If I could show you my bookshelf, a lot. There's probably well, so I think there's like probably around 18 actual Hellboy between the original Hellboy titles and then Hellboy in Hell. Then it spins out into BPRD.
Right.
BPRD, right. And so that's got like another 20, 30 books. I've actually read all of those. I've been slowly reading them a couple every summer for the last 10 years. So now I'm on to like the backstories and like the side stories. So I'm reading like they released a series of 1950s Hellboys. So he's like Hellboy as just quite like kind of in his late teens, 20s, I guess.
Okay.
Wiping up the Nazis after the war, dealing with Russians, that kind of stuff. Cool. And Abe Sapien, I'm reading the Abe Sapien book. So that's the Fishman from the BPRD books.
Yeah, I'm most familiar with the movies. I've read I've read maybe 1 or 2 of the comics, and I've seen a couple of the cartoons that they did.
Oh, those are very good. Yeah, and so a lot of those are based off of
I think is one of them.
Novels.
But they were based on the graphic novels, and those were pretty good as well. Hellboy reminds me of another comic series that I don't know if you're familiar with, Atomic Robo.
I'm familiar with it, but I haven't read it.
Okay. Basically, similar sort of concept to Hellboy is back in, I think it really was World War II. Basically, someone invented a robot powered by atomics, but it's sentient. And then, like, from then up until modern day, it follows Atomic Robo through all those years. And I've read a decent amount of those. You talking about BPRD reminded me that there's an Atomic Robo role-playing game as well. And that's, it's also made by Evil Hat, and it's fate-based. Like, that's one of those games, that and Hellboy would be one of those games where it would be a lot of fun to have proactive characters who had the ability to kind of players have the ability to manipulate the setting and world and stuff, and just go gonzo with it.
Right.
Because both of those sort of settings are pretty gonzo, and they both have secret government. Basically, it's Hellboy's part of BPRD, and Atomic Robo is part of a separate secret government organization, of super scientists, basically, who are battling against Cold War sort of era super scientists on the other side of government organization sort of thing. And I think there's even a rival government organization that trips them up every so often and things like that. So they're both very similar, and I'd love to play in either universe.
Yeah, no, the thing I always loved about Hellboy and why I love reading them by campfires is as a kid, I read way too many ghost stories. I was obsessed with mythology, and I just loved reading. And I had like all the Time Life books, right? And my parents would like get those for me when that was still a thing. And they had all of these like fantastic ghost stories in them, and like this, and not just ghost stories, but like the myths and legends of various cultures and what have you. And Hellboy loves to play with that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah,
like, they're mixing up those investigations, and so having a game where you were having that similar sort of tapestry that you could pull on would be pretty cool.
That would be cool,
because it's so weird, right? Like and some of these legends, like you see in the Hellboy animated series, right? Like they're just, which is in no way judging other cultures, but like even traditional European cultures, like there's just some strange legends that people came up with that like in the modern era you're like, wait, what now? Right? Like the whole night terrors, right? Now today we know that we have sleep paralysis. But people were thinking like when your cat jumped on your chest that it was sucking your breath out. Well, no, here you're just you're trapped in a dream and your body can't move yet, and you woke up and you think your cat's stealing your breath. Those kinds of mysteries are fascinating, and I love reading about them. So
yep. I remember those Time Life books as well. I checked them out from the library. Didn't have a copy of them, personally, but that and Irish ghost stories and basically that whole section in my school library, I went through most of it when I was in junior high, I think is when I was really into that. Kind of forgotten about that. So we're pretty far into recording here. Normally we do like a general topic. And as I said at the beginning, we didn't really have a general topic, but we thought we might get one by the time we got here. I'm now getting more fire. It's now dark, so more fireworks are going off outside. The room where Ken is in is getting pretty hot. And we've talked for a long time. So we're going to save this general topic, which is probably going to be like reading and consuming different media on audio, via print, via Kindle, etc. We're going to do that next time. Thank you all for joining us. We were glad to have you again. Unknown audience, because we still don't have a name and we haven't released any of these things. But we do value your feedback. Back in the days of Dragon Magazine, it was months before a letter got written and published, and then another couple months before someone wrote back. It's just fine sending us feedback for episode 1 a year after it came out. Go ahead and do it. Again, I'm David Moore.
And I'm Ken Newquist. And this has been our Untitled Podcast.
Yes. All right. Have a great day, everybody.